Our worship focus this summer is on being alert and praising God for all things and experiences in our lives. Our weekly prayer focus is reflected by each of the individual beads on our prayer beads. So if you haven't got one, there's still a few left. So those of you who may be gone, make sure you grab one. Today's bead is this little black one right here. It's black and it's a glass one. And it's to show that the light gets through in the darkness. It's to show that God is in the light and in the day and in the night, in the sadness and in the joy, that God gets through even any darkness that we might have. We hear of light and dark throughout our lives. We hear of struggles and what it means to lean on God during those struggles. The hope that we find in God and the light that shines through us when we lean onto God. So this morning, let us take some time to reflect on darkness and light and what it means to trust in God in all times. Let us pray. God of light and God of darkness, we gather today as your people, thankful for the role you play in all parts of our lives. Help us, God, see you in times of darkness and lean into you so that we may see the light in you. While we know that things cannot always be sunshine and rainbows, let us rest in the assurance that we receive through you and from you, loving God. We praise you for your constant presence in each of our lives and the gift that your presence offers us and all whom we encounter. And now, Lord, I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. For me, one of the main images that comes to mind when I think of the connection and contrast between darkness and light is that of the sunrise and of the sunset. The beckoning in of light in the morning and the putting to rest the light of day at night always reminds me of the promise of new things, as well as the constant presence of God in all things. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to bring a group of young people to the Easter sunrise service at Red Rocks down in Morrison. In years past, we had led a sunrise service at the church, which had always been meaningful and joy-filled. However, for some reason, this year, the motivation, the creativity simply wasn't there. This group of young people simply could not figure out what they wanted to do. So rather than forcing something to happen simply because we had always done it, we took this opportunity to experience Easter sunrise in a whole new way. I first got the okay from the lead pastor, and she offered her support. Then when I shared this idea with the young people and with their parents, there was a sense of excitement and purpose that had been lacking in our previous conversations. They saw light in this new and unique experience and were very excited. We moved from darkness into light regarding our feelings about what would happen this year for that Easter sunrise service. And then, my oh my, what a treat that service was. We arrived at Red Rocks, and if you've never been there, you should anytime. It's beautiful. But we arrived at Red Rocks in the dark and were able to witness the beauty and the gloriousness of the rising sun amidst the backdrop of those beautiful red rocks. The music was inspiring. The message was inspiring. And the transition from dark to light brought to life the Easter story like it had never been for me before. On the other end of the day, the transition from light to dark, I hold fondness to the setting of the sun over Lake Tahoe. Over several years, I've had the opportunity to watch as the sun went down over the horizon, and it never ceases to amaze me. I love to watch the sun shrink behind and to notice that first star that shines in the night sky. The reflection in the water is as inspiring as the color-changing sky is. That transition from day to night reminds me to pay attention to the beauty that is in us all. I'm a firm believer in seeing is believing. I'd like to share with you this morning a brief time-lapse video from just before a sunrise to just after sunset. Now, this is not at Lake Tahoe, and it's not at Red Rocks, because I couldn't find a good one for either. But it does show the beauty of the coming and the going, of the light and of the dark. Both light and dark are a part of our days, both in the physical sense, as we saw in that video, and in the emotional and spiritual sense as well. As a Christian and as an American, my heart aches for the darkness that many feel because of prejudice and because of loneliness. I weep for those who feel as though they are on their own to stand up for what is right. I pray for those who feel they are too far from God's grace and love. As humans, we only see part of the whole story, but God sees it all. God sees through our darkness and shines a light in, for, and through each of us. As the psalmist wrote, "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you." God's light shines in the darkness. God's light shines to lead the way. God's light is never too far from us. God's light is brighter and stronger than anything that may come our way. Just like most lights in our life, we must be willing to turn it on, to seek it out, to pay attention to it. God's presence and light is with us all of our days. It brings me comfort to know this. It reminds me of the personal and individual connection that God offers to each one of us. God wants to be connected to us, wants to be a part of our lives. God knows us, loves us, and desires to shine through our lives as the fearfully and wonderfully made people that we are. It is important to note that this is not simply a few people who are fearfully and wonderfully made, but all people are made and loved by God. God desires to shine through each and every one of us. Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, reminds us that we are called to shine the light of Jesus into the world. He reminds us that while we have the treasure of Jesus deep within us, the knowledge of that good news inside of us, all too often we keep it bottled up like a clay jar. But what did he mean by this? What was this clay jar? And how does it translate for you and for me? The word for that ancient mass market clay jar was an amphorae. It had 2 handles and was used by the Greeks and Roman merchants to transport things such as wine and olive oil. Some were fancy in finish and decor, while others of them were simple and basic and held their purpose. If full, those jars could weigh up to 100 pounds. That's a lot of wine. In transit, they would be stacked and tethered to prevent them from spilling or breaking. Then once they were delivered and their contents were consumed, the bottles were broken up and disposed of. It was not efficient to send them back, and they themselves were cheap and plentiful. So that whole reduce, reuse, recycle was not a part of their vocabulary. Interesting side note, there's a hill in Rome near the river Tiber called Monte Testaccio, I think is how you say that. This hill is over 100 feet high and covers an area of 220,000 square feet. However, it's not a naturally occurring hill, but rather it's an ancient trash heap, composed of the fragments of nearly 53 million of those jugs. That's a lot of wine. Fast forward a few thousand years, and who remembers those thick-bottomed green glass Coke bottles? Some of us only remember them from hearing about them. Some of us, that's what we used, everywhere in between. Those green glass Coke bottles are much more of a collector item and are artifacts for us yet today. Because Coke and many other beverages are now found in plastic bottles, couple different sizes, just as cheap and plentiful as those clay jars were back in ancient times. Captain Charles Moore is credited with discovering a modern-day version of Monte Testaccio, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's a huge, slowly rotating spiral of discarded plastic waste. He described it in this way: as I gazed from the deck at the surface of what ought to have been a pristine ocean, I was confronted as far as the eye could see with the sight of plastic. It seemed unbelievable, but I never found a clear spot. In the week that it took me to cross that subtropical high, no matter what time of day, I saw plastic. The wasting and throwing away aspect of both of these types of containers is not lost on me, and is something that I strive to reduce the use of myself, and is also likely a topic for another Sunday. However, whether we are looking at the ancient clay jars or those modern-day plastic bottles, the container itself is seen as insignificant. Paul reminds us that what is inside is what really matters. So the clay jar served as a perfect metaphor for Paul as he wrote to the Corinthians about how God used ordinary people to share an important truth about who Jesus was, the truth that comes through hearing the good news, hearing about the living gospel. It is Paul's desire to share the good news with all people and for them to do the same. We are called to share that treasure that is within each of us, to share the light of Christ that shines within each of us. But how do we do that? I believe that we do that through the words that we say and through the actions that we take. What are the injustices that you see in our world? What can you do to make a difference? How can you shine light into the darkness? Maybe it's as simple as smiling at someone when you pass them on the road. Maybe it's calling your legislators to share your opinion on current policies and issues. Maybe it's volunteering in a food bank or at a local shelter. Maybe it's taking up a collection of money or items to be donated for those who are in need. Maybe it's through your kind words spoken to a child to encourage them in their life and in their faith journey. Maybe it's using one less plastic bottle than you would normally use. Maybe it's picking up trash as you're walking down the street to take care of that. Whatever it looks like for each of you, I encourage you to find that spark within you, to share that spark, and to shine the light of Christ on others. You just might be amazed by what happens next. Amen.